evening, everyone. It's a pleasure to be here as always. And for this week's gospel moment, I bring to you the following passage from John 14, 15 through 17 and 26 that says, "If you love me, keep my commandments, and I will pray to my Father, and he will send you another consoler, so that he may remain with you forever, the Spirit of truth, whom the world cannot receive, because it neither sees him nor knows him. But as for you, you will know him, because he will remain with you, and he will be among you. But the Consoler, who is the Holy Spirit, whom my Father will send in my name, will teach you all things, and will enable you to remember everything that I have said to you." So let's reflect about this passage from the Gospel. Jesus, when he was on earth, he taught us many things. He shared with us many important teachings. But during his stay on the earth, humanity was still very immature. Thus, they couldn't comprehend everything. They didn't even have the knowledge of the basic sciences yet. So Jesus had to teach everything in parables and allegories and metaphors and stories of that nature. More or less like when a parent wants to put his child to sleep, he reads him a bedtime story. So the child will calm down, he will rest, and perhaps reflect on that story during sleep and wake up having learned whatever moral lesson that story brings to that child. And Jesus always warned us, specifically in Matthew 11:15, that he who has ears, let him hear. In other words, don't take the words that he says literally, because his parables have a deeper meaning, and we must reflect upon the teachings that he brought to us. You can't just listen to it and assume it means what he is saying. You have to take it in, chew on the study, on the story or the allegory that he's teaching, the parable, digest it, and then reflect upon the content of that particular passage, so we can then perhaps begin to understand what it means. So they require a lot of reflection. And this promised consoler would come to teach us additional things. It would teach additional matters. And because Christ had not yet told us everything, Christ had to limit himself because, again, humanity was too immature to understand things. So he couldn't teach everything then, and which is why, as I said, he had to use allegories and parables. And this promised consoler, what it does, and it continues to do, is it comes to remind us of his teachings, and or more likely to clarify his teachings. And that is what Spiritism does. Spiritism is the promised consoler, and it reveals the meanings of Jesus' parables. It explains exactly what they meant directly, and most of the laws, if not everything that Spiritism teaches us, has a scientific basis. In other words, everything is based on natural laws. There are no miracles. Nothing derogates from the natural law. Everything is within it. We label things as miracles because we don't yet understand them, and they're beyond our scope of knowledge. And the Spiritist doctrine is clear and doesn't use allegories or parables. And it is the consoler because it soothes the pain of those going through earthly trials and pains and things of that nature, because it introduces the notion of a future life. So what that does is it is essentially the curtain of problems that we go through falls before our eyes and unveils this beautiful orchestra or symphony with harmonious melodies inviting us to join divinity, to join this idea of a future life, and to leave behind the problems and issues that we deal with in our daily lives, because they're so small when speaking about infinite matters. And it enables us to see things from a higher perspective, because Spiritism teaches us about a future life. We might be in a city, and if we don't have this knowledge of a future life or this vision of a future life, when we're walking in the streets, we're constantly looking down or forward, and we're worried about what's going on around us. But what Spiritism does, it brings us this higher perspective, this notion of there's something beyond, something greater. And there's a reason for us to be here going through all of this. In essence, instead of being in the city streets, we're at a mountaintop looking at the city from far away, thus rendering all the trials and problems that we deal with to be trivial, to be small, minute, things that will enable us to progress. And this is where, what Spiritism does is it teaches us where we came from, where we are going, and why we are here on the earth. That's why it's so wonderful, and that's why it's so consoling, because it tells us why we're here. It's like that kiosk at the mall when you're lost and you're frustrated, and it says you're right here, so you know exactly where you're at and where you need to go to get to that store, or in other words, to get to that next step of evolution. And Jesus was the door, and Kardec was the key. His teachings was the door. Kardec brought us a Spiritist doctrine, which was the key that allows us to open this door, go into this wonderful new room filled with new teachings and things that we can understand, instead of being locked behind this door and not trying to figure out what are the contents behind it or within that particular room. And the morality of the gospel, and this is on a footnote in the gospel explained by the Spiritist Doctrine, where it says the morality of the gospel is the highest creation of the human conscience. And in the Spirit's book in item 621, the ennobled spirits, or the higher spirits, tell us that the divine law is written within our conscience. In other words, if the gospel is a divine law, we have the gospel within us. And Spiritism came to reawaken this inner divinity that we all have within us. It lays in there forgotten, dormant, and this is the purpose of Spiritism, is to reawaken that. To water that seed that has yet to blossom into a beautiful heavenly rose, which we all have within us. And how do we do this? We do this through work in the good. Because charity is the spark, studying is the enlightenment, the unshakable faith is the foundation, progress are the bricks, love is the mortar that binds the bricks together, the bricks of life, allowing us to raise this new house of faith, of trust, and understanding why we are here. And let us do this. Let us build this house, and let it be a resplendent home, or one of the dwellings in our Father's house. So I welcome you always to study the gospel, digest its content, live it, understand it, and just embrace it, because it is love, and love is something that we all need in our lives. Thank you very much.